Andrew Johnson, the most embattled president in American history. A shot echoed throughout the theater. America's most influential president, Abraham Lincoln, was killed. As a result, Lincoln's vice president, Andrew Johnson, became president. Because of Lincoln's assassination in the Civil War, the United States was divided on how to reconstruct the country. Radical Republicans constantly debated failed President Andrew Johnson and Democrats, with numerous speeches and legislation that resulted in sweeping civil rights and infrastructure changes, which improved many lives to come. Johnson promised to pursue a policy that would heal the wounds and repair the ravages of war, but most saw he was doomed from the beginning. One journalist wrote,
"The melancholy spectacle of his inauguration was foreboding."
Clashes began early on as Republican leaders Senator Charles Sumner and Congressman Thaddeus Stevens wanted black men to be equal to vote and own land, while Johnson, a former slave owner, supported lenient policies raiding the Pardon of 1865, which gave whites a governmental upper hand by allowing formerly rebel Confederates to vote and run for office once again while giving back their land and money unpunished. Johnson even pardoned the Confederate vice president. As a result, their new governments passed black codes, which severely limited African American employment abilities and everyday rights. These codes were so restricting, pundits called them
slavery under a different name.
An infuriated and overwhelmingly Republican Congress called for an overthrow of Johnson's policies and proposed bills such as the Freedmen's Bureau Extension and the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The Freedmen's Bureau Extension extended the first Freedmen's Bureau Act, which finally hired agents to negotiate disputes, assist freedmen, and establish freedmen courts, while the Civil Rights Act was a landmark piece of legislation which secured black equal rights for the first time in United States history, as well as build the South's first public schools and improve women's rights. President Johnson unexpectedly vetoed both these bills, a strong message to Republicans who reasoned Johnson was on their side. Southerners rejoiced. All hail, victory to the white man. Reporters said he had
severed himself from the loyal party.
But Congress, chock full of Republicans, overrode his veto for the first time in history with a vote of 33 to 15, putting the Civil Rights Act into law, a major victory in Republicans' quest for true equality. Around then, as the 1866 midterm elections were coming up, Johnson delivered a set of speeches dubbed Swing Around the Circle. But during the tour, both sides put each other down with stunningly disrespectful rhetoric, such as when Johnson called Congressman Stevens a disunionist. Stevens then attacked Johnson, claiming his speeches were a remarkable traveling circus. While Johnson's speeches demonstrate that it was an effective way to argue, pundits claim they failed miserably. And you got it. The Republicans won overwhelming victories in the 1866 midterm elections. Around this time, though, violence appeared as relations between parties became strained. Riots broke out in Memphis between black and white soldiers, killing an extraordinary 100 people and burning 12 African American schools. To solve this and other overreaching problems, Congress passed the 4 Reconstruction Acts of 1867. Over Johnson's veto, in which radicals commanded the South to hold conventions that drafted new constitutions and granted former slaves citizenship. 25% of convention attendees were black, the first public event with that turnout. Although conventions boasted much bipartisanship with the president, some states defied Johnson as he made requests but did not press for them. For example, South Carolina paid its debt to a Confederate general despite his opposition. The Reconstruction Acts also appointed military governors to control unrest and protect racial indifference in the South, which accomplished massive amounts despite being corrupt, as well as take voting rights from 10% of loyal Confederates, allow blacks to vote, and invest big money in economic developments such as new railroads, roads, and schools that politicians hoped would increase prosperity. Overall, this policy created a radical, streamlined, but unsegregated approach from the bottom up. Despite inspiring racist white movements such as the Ku Klux Klan. But Republicans then began worrying about another danger. They didn't want Johnson to fire his Secretary of War Edwin Stanton as he was a radical Republican. So Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act over Johnson's veto, which drastically limited his power as president, including the ability to fire secretaries such as Stanton. But Johnson tested this law, which he caused unconstitutional by suspending him and appointing Ulysses S. Grant. After Grant resigned due to Senate disapproval, Johnson officially fired the Secretary of War and appointed Lorenzo Thomas. But Senator Sumner then sent a one-word telegram to Stanton: stick. And stick he did, as the Senate voted 35-6 not to fire him. The next day, the door closed on Thomas. But the Senate also accused Johnson of violating the Tenure of Office Act. Now, presidential impeachment no longer seemed like a far-fetched idea. Articles of impeachment were brought up in Congress. Ben Butler spoke the pro-impeachment opening argument, claiming Johnson violated the Tenure of Office Act and brought the nation backwards by allying with pro-slave Democrats, creating a climate similar to before the Civil War. Ben Curtis spoke the pro-Johnson argument, pointing out impeachment is reserved for a time of dire emergency, not partisan politics. But for the first time in history, the House approved articles of impeachment. The public was so involved that at a secret session which came before the impeachment vote, every nook and cranny was filled with citizens and reporters. Meanwhile, the Senate trial lagged on for weeks, as senators and managers made their cases. On the final day, as tickets were taken and spectators filed in, Senator Sumner came to the podium, reinstating that Johnson's policies take us backwards.
The lives of innocent men must be rescued from sacrifice.
And proceeded to blast Johnson's civil rights policy, claiming,
This monstrous power of slavery has found refuge in the executive mansion.
Despite radicals' opinions, many key moderates, such as Senator James Grimes, sided with the president, stating impeachment is reserved for the most extreme of times.
I do differ from the president, but I'm not able to record my vote that he is guilty of high crimes and misdemeanors.
Lyndon Trumbull, another senator, said,
When the excitement of the hour subsides, pro-impeachment arguments will be insufficient. I tremble for the future of my country.
But Manager Stevens spoke the closing argument, stating Johnson is a wretched man, standing at bay. Outside, the media was abuzz with chatter and excitement. The final vote resulted in Johnson being acquitted by one vote, though bribes were involved. Impeachment caused Johnson's last year as president to drag on as he listened to Congress and did not introduce significant measures. Congress, meanwhile, required the former Confederate states to ratify the 14th Amendment, allowing blacks to become full citizens.
The reason for the 14th Amendment was because the Republicans didn't trust Johnson to enforce the Civil Rights Act.
The states had to ratify this and accept black suffrage originally approved in the Reconstruction Acts before being readmitted to the Union.
Southern states were put in a bind. They had to meet these requirements.
Plowing through fierce resistance, Republicans succeeded in requiring all but 2 states to accept the amendment. Finally, blacks could voice their own opinion, improving lives, fulfilling endless dreams, and making radicals victorious. After this, Republicans, unsurprisingly, did not renominate Johnson, instead choosing General Grant, who, with a slogan of, "Let us have peace, vote Grant for president," proceeded to win the 1868 election. Sumner stayed in politics while Johnson ran for Senate as the long Reconstruction process slowly ended. As we look back at this period in time, you see innocent lives rescued by normal people of all races who worked together for new changes, bravely stood for justice, and achieved lasting inspiration and insight throughout the future of the United States.
Those amendments became the basis for the Civil Rights Movement led by Martin Luther King in the 1950s and 60s.
Black politicians such as Deval Patrick and Barack Obama have also been able to step up their cause.
Yes, we can!
Captivated by the first black leaders such as Robert Elliott, who as a rising star in a hostile environment, bravely demanded an end to corruption and the right to vote. We can also see how debated issues today worked out back then. For example, infrastructure spending caused Atlanta, a city crippled during the Civil War, to revive itself and attract triple the population it previously had, moving forward in a time of despair. Even the most embattled president in history agreed, saying, "I still have faith that all will come out all right." Despite the ups and downs of the hardest time in history, Reconstruction healed a country torn apart by war, creating changes of astounding new heights, achieving the unthinkable, turning the next page in American history.